Hello and salam. Welcome to Muslim Viewpoint, a new podcast series powered by American Muslim Today, a groundbreaking non-profit digital newspaper which champions civic engagement. AMT informs and empowers the diverse voices of almost 30 million Muslims here in the US and other Western countries. I'm Rifat Malik. I am AMT's editor-in-chief, and today we have an interview with children's book author Jamilah Thompkins-Bigelow. Jamilah is a Philadelphia-based educator whose work centers on young Black Muslim protagonists and has been recognized widely and critically praised by many trusted voices in literature, including the American Library Association, School Library Journal, and NPR. She's published 4 books featuring Black Muslim children and will be releasing her new book, Salat in Secret, next year in June. Jamilah spoke to our reporter Maya Gaylor about the inspiration behind her writing and why it's important to give children representation.
Why is it important for you to write stories that are specifically about Black Muslim children?
Because it's who I am. It's who my children are, it's my community, because they exist. That's really what it is. It's just other people don't have to think about why it's important to write stories about people who share their identity. They just write them, and they know that it's important that those people be in books. It's just sort of something they take for granted. But for me, it's like I almost have to explain it because we're so rarely in stories. It's an odd thing to kind of explain why I should be in a book, or why people like me should be in a book, right? But it's not, there's not even although there's all these different things like self-esteem and things that support kids, but at heart is that, well, Black Muslim people exist, so they should be in books because they're people in the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it sounds like you have maybe, I don't know, an opinion or something about representation. So, just like you said, obviously representation comes from just media existing from that perspective. So, what are your thoughts on representation and how they can help build a culture of understanding?
So in terms of so I do have some concerns about feeling like the work of representation is, or the work of authors that are marginalized, right? And representing themselves, that their work is in building understanding, although that is an outcome, I think, of the work. I think that there is a pressure on a lot of marginalized creators to be ones who are building understanding, right? And that's not really a fair pressure to put on the work, because when you put that pressure on the work, then it's like, I have to explain myself, then my work has to be, it starts to play to another audience, right? And when I set out to do work, I try to push away thoughts of, who's in the mainstream, how will mainstream readers, think about this, dominant culture. Let's just say that. I'm saying mainstream and being nicer. But, when we think about dominant culture, we're talking about white, non-Muslim culture. What do they think about what I have written here? And do they understand me and like me better now? I try to push those thoughts away. I don't really want to write for them. When I write, I feel like I want to write for that Black Muslim child and what they understand and enjoy. And to a point where sometimes I do write as if I'm writing to a younger version of myself. And what story does that person want to read, and just care about that. It's not my job to help other people to understand me, necessarily. I think the representation is for us. It's for the people who need that representation. So it starts at that. At the heart of it, starts at that. And I think sometimes a part of being marginalized is that the people who are from a dominant culture think that everything is for them. And I've had people talk to me about my work in that way. Well, white children need to read this book. I guess all children hopefully need to read this book, but I mean, it's not, I didn't write it specifically, particularly for them, although I would hope that they can enjoy the book. I do write for all children, but it, when I'm writing, I'm like, no, little Jamilah needs this book. You know what I mean? And that's what it is. So I think, and I think a lot of times Muslim communities, we get wrapped up in wanting to be understood. And it creates a subservient sort of, it makes us feel subservient, right? It creates like this, belief about ourselves that we need to serve other populations and we need to convince them that we are worthy, that we are human, that we're good enough, that we are, we're not these different things. And it really affects our work in negative ways. And I think we need to let go of that pressure. If people want to misunderstand us, they're going to misunderstand us because they have an agenda and they will find the things to prove whatever they want to prove. If people are coming to the work with an openness, then this will build understanding. It will be an outcome, but it shouldn't be that is my intention in going into the work, that I need to help you to build understanding of me.
Right, exactly. Very good point. So where does your inspiration for these stories come from, and why do you enjoy specifically writing for children?
My inspiration comes from life. So it's either stuff that's happened to me or stuff that I've observed. I've worked as an educator. I have kids, so they give me so much, those things just give me so much fodder, so much inspiration, so much work. Sometimes even like a picture, an image, something that someone says, it just sparks the ideas for me. Like that's one thing that has been a blessing so far, is that I'm never really like grasping for ideas. There's always like, oh, that's an idea. Oh, that's an idea. And it's more so me trying to filter through the ideas and figure out which ones are going to work. And I forgot the second part of your question.
Why do you enjoy specifically writing for children?
And then I enjoy writing for children. It really is kind of therapeutic. I think younger Jamilah did need those stories, and I didn't realize how much. And being able to kind of create that literature is just really pleasurable. I did start writing for children just because I wanted to see more of those kinds of books with that representation for my own kids. But then it became, after a while, no, this is kind of a selfish pleasure, and it's okay. That I do take pleasure in being able to write stories that affirm that inner child and that let me play around with that inner child. And I think writing with the voice of a child, it is therapeutic. It's a pleasure. It's fun in a way that other kinds of writing just isn't as much fun for me. I love writing other kinds of things, but writing from the voice of a child, I just immediately kind of get that smile on my face, and I feel like I'm in that kid space again.
Right. And then so specifically with your latest book that's about to come out early next year, Salat and Secret, what was the inspiration for that?
So that one, there were actually two different things happening in my life that kind of came together to inspire that book. One was when I started writing the book, my father had passed just a couple of weeks prior to that. Allah's mercy be upon him. And he was somebody growing up who loved, he really loved being a Muslim, and really taught me, pride in Islam. And he worked odd jobs. So he worked as like a cab driver. He worked as an ice cream truck, ice cream man. He was driving, delivering things, courier. He did all kinds of work like that. And, often in that kind of work, he might not be close to a place to pray. And so he was very unabashed about, going and finding places to pray. And also there were just stories of people in that sort of, in his people he worked around, who also, they're very much people who, would, take out a prayer rug and pray on the sidewalk, if they needed to, and they had different experiences with that, and so that was one experience that kind of inspired the story, thinking about, having that parent and sometimes feeling embarrassed about that. Just sort of like, oh my gosh, we're praying outside and there are people walking by. And then it was also in a period where in about a couple weeks, my youngest son was becoming 7, and I was thinking about buying him a salat rug to kind of, celebrate sort of the idea that, well, he's 7 and this is kind of the stage where you tell a kid, you need to start praying your 5 daily prayers. And so I was thinking about that, and then just kind of how excited my dad might be about that. And it all came together into this story of this little boy who, in the beginning of the story, he turned 7 and his dad, ice cream man dad, gives him a salat rug. And the little boy's so excited about this prayer rug that he gets. And his dad is like very, again, somebody who prays anywhere in public, but the little boy is shy. And so he is, wanting to pray all 5 daily prayers, but he's too scared to ask for a place to pray during the school day. So he is sneaking around, trying to find secret places to pray in his school. So that, and I mean, I think a lot of Muslims have had this experience, people who are observant of other prayer, trying to find a place to pray, right? And trying to be secretive. And so that all kind of came together in the story of, little Muhammad, who is sneaking around trying to find a place to pray, and his ice cream, his dad, who's an ice cream man, who prays very publicly on the sidewalk.
That's very sweet. And then, so through all of your books, what kind of values or lessons do you hope are coming across to children and parents?
I think there is a thread in all of my books where it's kind of like wanting children to love who they are, and love all of who they are, and just like be very, very unapologetic about it. Like, you are who you are, love all of you. So I think that continues throughout. There's always, somehow it always shows up in the books that, that there is a real push for loving who they are, their identities and who they are, even when the stories aren't really about identity necessarily. So.
And is that the biggest takeaway you hope for, just to have somewhere to put their identity, or are there other kinds of lessons?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of lessons, things like, advocating for yourself. I mean, but that's sort of an identity thing, right? Things like friendship. There are stories that are coming out that haven't been out, that aren't out yet, but that doesn't make sense. I said that redundant, but there are stories that I have coming out that are about friendship a lot. So a lot of focus on, how communicating with each other and misunderstandings, and trying to make that right. But ultimately, yeah, that's like a thread. If you wanted to say like what is a message, like it is really about figuring out, I think I just love little kids and I want them to love themselves. You know what I mean? Like I built my career around working with children, working with youth, and it's always very important to me to be like, you know what, who you are is beautiful, who you are is good. And so I want you to feel that in my books every time.
Yeah. And then what has been the highlight of your career?
I think the highlight, there have been a number of them. So it's kind of, it really comes from a lot of the schools and students, just, people like celebrating the books. So I'm going to pick one that seems kind of small, but I just, this one always tickles me. And, how kids have to dress up as book characters for school. I always love it when I see, a little kid dressed as one of my characters. The first time I saw a picture of a girl dressed as the girl on the cover of Mommy's Kimar, you know, a little Black Muslim girl. You know, I also someone recently sent me a photo of someone dressed like the girl on Your Name Is a Song. And it's just, it feels so much more real, right? To see like kids, like they are reading, I don't, you know, I might not even know these kids, right? And they are reading my books in different places in the country, around the world. And it appealed to them so much that, you know, they're going to come dressed as a character, you know, from my book, you know, and, you know, with corduroy and, you know, all of these different, you know, common characters that we hear about, you know, but they're going to come dressed as, you know, a character that I created from my brain. So that's pretty cool.
Well, also related to children's literature, the Mindful Muslim Reader website was developed by mothers who wanted to ensure their children were engaging with books that would reflect their Islamic values. One of the founding members, Miriam Chikaku, tells our reporter Hadiya Spalic just how they built their list of recommendations and how they're empowering parents and children alike.
Okay, so you said how the book selection process works?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's right now the four members of our team. We're all readers for the website. And when we see a book that we like, we ask, we read it cover to cover. I think that's one of the things that people really appreciate about our website is that they're kind of assured that we've read it and looked at all the pictures and everything. So what we're looking for is books that really kind of gild a child's moral imagination. And what that, you know, kind of a big word, but what it means is that it kind of inculcates in them the good values and good character. That's kind of the main goal. And they're not necessarily books like what we call Muslim books, like written by Muslims or about Muslim characters and Muslim storylines. They can be classics, like we have The Hobbit, more, you know, modern books like Aragon, you know, like dragon fantasy series. So what we're looking for is virtue in the book. So, you know, does it help my child have good moral character in accordance with, you know, our tradition, Islamic tradition? So once we read the book, we rate it in 4 categories.
And so you mentioned the 4 specific elements: virtue, language, story, and beauty. Why did you guys decide to choose those specifically to rate your books and base them around?
Yeah, so it was it took us many months actually of what we did is, you know, we just started looking at books like, okay, what would be important to parents? So virtue, what I talked about is just the kind of the reason that we have the website, you know, is this building good character for my children? Language, because, you know, in recent decades, the quality of the language that we speak, that we hear, that we read has really declined. You know, and this is shown through a lot of different studies of just like what the average reader is used to in terms of vocabulary or like complicated sentence structures. It's kind of declining even what they're teaching in schools. You know, from like a few generations ago, even till now, there's a stark difference. So what we wanted to do with the language is kind of bring that back, because language is so important in our tradition. You know, having good language, having good grammar, to be able to speak clearly, express yourself clearly, and understand what others are saying. It's such an important part of our tradition that is you know, being lost by just always speaking in very modern language and very slangy language. So at least in books, if you're reading good language, you absorb that and it becomes kind of part of who you are. So that's why we chose language. Story is just, you know, of course, any book. It doesn't matter how good your language is or how high your morals are. If you don't have a good story to pull in the reader, the child, you can't get the message across. So story was kind of the basic one. And beauty was kind of the one that was really important to us in terms of just elevating what we're looking at, what our children are looking at, what becomes part of them. Like when you become what you reflect what you see. So, and what you're exposed to, what you consume. So if you're consuming and reading and taking in something of beauty, it becomes kind of part of who you are. So it's also part of our tradition, in all of the traditional Muslim cultures. We have Islamic art, and we have, that idea of doing things with ihsan, with excellence, as the highest level of doing something. So we're hoping our website also kind of reflects that aesthetic of clean and simple and beautiful. So that was really important to us.
What do you wish was more, or at least better, addressed in children's literature, and what is something that you think is right?
So, some of the trends we're noticing in children's literature is really disrespect for elders, and that's kind of a modern trend across the board, and the idea that the idea that you're only responsible for yourself, that there's a decline in the idea of responsibility for your family, for your parents, for your community, service. We're seeing a decline in those kind of ideas in books, especially the ones for young teens, YA genre. Sometimes they're just overly filled with the gory violence. We have books that are violent, like The Hobbit. We're gonna, put The Lord of the Rings on there pretty soon. But books are filled with unnecessary, gory details with no purpose other than just to be gory. We're seeing a lot of that. So, there's a place especially for boys, they like sword fights and, dragons and even war, which we're totally okay with. But the idea that, you kind of still have to protect the heart of a child. So we're seeing all those things. So we really look for books, especially in that young teen genre, that shows this is a young teen who is respectful to their parents, who takes care of their elders, who serves the community, is not completely absorbed in their own self. Which is, some of the trends that we're seeing that's disheartening in children's literature. So we're trying to recommend books that are opposing those trends.
Well, thanks for joining us this week from me and the team, Hadiya Spalic and Maya Gela. Thanks so much. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter and TikTok at American Muslim Today. And if you'd like to read more about this story and access more digital content, feel free to check out our website, AmericanMuslimToday.com. We'll see you next week on The Muslim Viewpoint.